Have you bought this crochet kit from Kmart? Are you completely confused by the instructions? If so, know that you're not alone. Throw the instructions away, watch this tutorial instead, and I'll show you how to make this granny square tote bag. This is a very beginner-friendly tutorial. However, if this is your very first time picking up a crochet hook, you might want to check out my Learn How to Crochet for Absolute Beginners playlist before you get stuck into this tutorial. In particular, you might want to watch the videos on how to hold your hook and yarn, how to do a magic circle, and how to do a double crochet. Okay, so here's what you get included in the kit. You get kind of a random selection of these coloured yarns and then a big chunk of white yarn. There's a 3mm crochet hook, a large plastic tapestry needle, and the instruction manual. Now, the really important thing to say right from the outset is that you can't actually work from the white yarn as it is at the moment. So these little balls of coloured yarn are fine, but this yarn here is actually in what's called a hank. And if you try and work straight from the hank as it is at the moment, you're going to get a complete tangled mess and you will literally spend hours trying to untangle it. So actually what you want to do is to wind this into a ball before you start crocheting. It's pretty frustrating that Kmart provides the yarn in this format because most new crocheters are not going to know that you can't work straight from this and that you need to roll it into a ball. Okay, so to roll it into a ball, what you need to do is to be able to hold it taut while you unwind it. So if you've got a Swift and a yarn ball winder, then perfect, use that. But if you're just starting out, you almost certainly won't have one of those. So what you can use instead is either you can wrap this hank around two chair legs, or you can get a friend to kind of hold it taut between two outstretched arms. And then you just want to find the start of the yarn. Mine looks like it's tied in a knot here. And then while your hank is being held taut, you can start to gently unwind the yarn and roll it into a ball as you go. So to roll it into a ball, you just want to start by winding it around two fingers. Once you've done it around your fingers a few times, you can pull it off your fingers and then start to go horizontally. And then start to go vertically again, and your aim is really just to end up with a rough ball shape. So just go in different directions so that your ball of yarn ends up roughly spherical. I'm going to do mine on my yarn Swift and ball winder, but doing it manually like this will work just as well. Don't skip this step. I know it might feel tedious, but if you do, you're going to have an absolute nightmare trying to untangle your yarn. Okay, so once you've wound your white yarn into cakes or balls, now we can start crocheting. So they include a 3mm hook in the kit. I'm going to use my own 3mm hook. This is my Clover and More, just because I find their hooks are not the best quality. And you can start really with any colour. So they suggest in the pattern that you can use any kind of different combination of colours for each of your granny squares. I'm going to broadly try and follow what's on the photo, but I do notice that there's really random amounts of each of the coloured yarns, like there's hardly any red, for example. So I think it's going to end up being a case of just using what I have left as I get further into the granny squares. But I'm going to start by making the square here, so we're going to start with the red. And you want to start with a magic circle. Now, magic circles are quite tricky. They are one of the trickiest things to get your head around when you are starting out with crochet. So if this is your first time crocheting and you're finding the magic circle a little bit hard, take a look in the description where I've included a slower tutorial for how to do a magic circle. And in that video as well, I show you an alternative approach if you're really just struggling to get the hang of the magic circle. So to do a magic circle, you want to hold your yarn tail facing down between your thumb and first finger. And then we're going to wrap the yarn around your first two fingers, go underneath, and then cross it over the top in an X like so. So underneath will be two straight bars, on top is an X. Then you want to take your crochet hook, go under this top strand of yarn here. We're going to grab the second strand of yarn with the head of our crochet hook, and we're going to pull it through to the other side. Then you're going to twist your crochet hook so that now you're sitting on top. Now you want to make sure that there's a little bit of space in this loop. Don't do the loop too tight or you'll struggle to pull the next piece of yarn through. Then we're going to grab this strand of yarn here, and I find it's useful just to hold this strand with my thumb to keep it straight. And we're just going to hook that on top of our crochet hook and then just pull that through the loop on our hook. And that's magic circle. So I'll show you that one more time. yarn tail facing down, cross over the top, under this first strand, grab the second strand and pull it through, twist it on top, then grab this strand and pull that through the loop on your hook. And as I say, be sure to check out the description below if you want a slower tutorial for how to do a magic circle. Now, something I just want to note about the pattern here, confusingly, the Kmart kit patterns are not all written in the same language. So if you're new to crochet, you might not know that there are two main crochet languages, US terminology and UK terminology. And confusingly, these two languages use the same words to mean different kind of crochet stitches. And even more confusingly, in my experience, the Kmart kits, some of them are written in US terminology, some are written in UK terminology, and they don't tell you which one it's written in. So I just want to explain the terms that they include in the instructions and what I'm going to call them through this tutorial. I'm going to work in US terminology. The reason for that is I think it's the more commonly used language online, particularly on YouTube, so it's more useful, I think, as a language to learn. Also, most of the Kmart kits are actually written in US terminology. This one is written in UK terminology, sort of. So the stitch that they call a treble crochet, I'm going to call a double crochet, which is what it's called in US terminology. This is what it's called in UK terminology. So I'll refer to this as a double crochet throughout. They have called this one a short stitch. I'm not sure what language that is. There's no stitch called a short stitch that I'm aware of in any crochet language. But this is essentially a single crochet in US terminology, so that's what I'll call it. Hi, I just wanted to quickly jump in here to tell you that I am very excited to have launched my own Learn How to Crochet kit. So if you're getting frustrated with your Kmart kit at any point and you want to upgrade to a kit that has better materials and better quality instruction, be sure to check out my Learn How to Crochet kit in my YouTube storefront or on Etsy or madeit.com.au. I'll include a little bit more information about the kit and what you can expect at the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. Okay, so to start our granny square, we're going to chain 3. So to do a chain, you just want to drape the yarn over your crochet hook from the back to the front, and then pull your crochet hook down and pull that yarn through the loop on your hook. And we're going to do that 3 times. Now in this pattern, they don't treat this starting chain as a stitch. I don't think that that looks as good because this is a really big turning chain, and so if you ignore it and don't treat it as a stitch, your granny circle will look a bit asymmetrical. So I've altered the pattern slightly and I'm going to treat this as a stitch. So these first 3 chains are basically going to act as though they were our first double crochet, and you're going to do one more chain, which is the chain that's going to sit in between our stitches. Then we'll do a double crochet, and so to do a double crochet you want to yarn over, insert your crochet hook into the middle of the circle, yarn over and pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. You'll now have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Then we'll do another chain and another double crochet. And we're going to do this 8 times in total. So this is our first stitch, which was our chain 3, separated by 1 chain. This is our second double crochet, followed by another chain, and our third double crochet. So we'll do another chain, another double crochet, chain, double crochet. So once you've got 8 in total, so your initial chain 3 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 double crochets, then you're just going to pull on this little yarn tail here, and that will close up our circle into a little loop like this. If when you pull your yarn tail nothing happens, you might have done your magic circle the wrong way around, so give it another shot. And then to close up our circle, we'll do 1 more chain, and then we're going to slip stitch back into our first stitch to close it up. So we want to insert our crochet hook in the top of the 3 chains we did at the start. So here's our first chain, here's our second chain, here's our third chain. So you want to insert your hook into that third chain. Then we're going to do a slip stitch. So to do a slip stitch, you just want to yarn over, and then we're going to pull that yarn through the stitch and through the loop on our hook. So we'll pull it through the stitch, and then we're going to pull it through the loop on our hook. And that's a slip stitch. And then that's the first row of your granny square done. Now we're going to switch colour for the next row so we can fasten this off. So to do that, you just want to cut a yarn tail. You want to have a couple of inches, enough to be able to weave in your ends, but I find they're not particularly generous with the amount of yarn they give you in these kits, so you don't want to be too generous with your tails, or otherwise you might run out of yarn. So once you've cut off your tail, then you can yarn over and pull that yarn tail all the way through. And then if you pull it tight, that will create a knot. And then you'll have a little circle like this, which will have 8 little spokes around the outside. Then we want to grab our second colour, so that will be the white. Okay, then for row 2, we're going to be working into these chain spaces. So in between each double crochet, we did a chain 1, and it's created these holes or gaps around our circle. And this is actually where we're going to be working our next row. So you want to insert your hook into any one of these spaces. Then you can drape the next colour over your crochet hook and just pull that through to the front of your work. Then, just like the last row, we're going to start with a chain 3. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, and that acts like our first double crochet. Now for this row, we're going to do a cluster of 3 double crochets into each one of these gaps. This first chain 3 that we've just done acts as though it was one of our double crochets. So we're just going to do 2 more double crochets into the very same gap. So we'll just yarn over, go back into that same hole, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and we'll do that one more time. Then you want to chain 1, then we're going to do 3 double crochets into this next gap here. Then once you've done your 3 double crochets, we'll do another chain 1 and another 3 double crochets into the next gap. So you just want to keep repeating this around. So you're doing a chain 1 in between each cluster of 3 double crochets, and you'll be doing it into each of these gaps, so you'll have 8 clusters by the end. So once you've done your final cluster, then we will do another chain 1, and then we're going to work back into the top of our chain 3, just like we did for round 1. So you just want to insert your crochet hook into the top of that chain 3, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then pull that loop through the loop on your hook. Then we can fasten off this row as well. So again, you can just cut a yarn tail, yarn over, and pull that all the way through. Okay, now for row 3. So for row 3, we're going to use the pink yarn. So this time we're going to work gaps between our clusters. So there's a gap here, basically the places where we did a chain in between our groupings of 3 double crochets. So you just want to insert your hook into one of those spaces, and then we'll add the pink yarn in the same way. So just drape it over your crochet hook and bring it to the front. And again, we'll start with a chain 3. Now we're going to do another cluster into this space. So given we've done our chain 3, that acts as our first double crochet, so we'll just do 2 more into the same space. Then we will chain 1, and then into this next space we're going to do a corner. So to do a corner, we're actually going to do 2 clusters. So we'll do our first cluster as normal, so we'll do 3 double crochets. Then we're going to chain 1 and do another cluster of 3 double crochets all into the same space. So we'll chain 1 and then do 3 more double crochets all into the same space. And it's a little bit hard to see that now, but this has created a bit of a curve, which is going to serve as the corner of our granny square. Then into this next space, we're just going to do this a single cluster. So we'll do a chain and then a cluster of 3 double crochets into that gap. Another chain. Into this next space, we're going to do our next corner. So we'll do 1 cluster of 3 double crochets, chain 1 and another 3 double crochets. Then we'll chain 1 and just do a single cluster into this next space, so 3 double crochets. Chain 1, and then this is our third corner, so again we'll do 2 clusters of 3 double crochets separated by a chain. This next one is just a single cluster, so 1 chain, 3 double crochets. And then this last gap is our last corner, so chain 1, 1 cluster, chain 1 and a second cluster into the same space. Then we'll just do 1 final chain, and again we're going to work back into the top of our chain 3 and do a slip stitch. And again we can fasten off. So now your granny square is starting to look a little bit more square. It'll still be a little bit rounded, it'll become more square as we do the subsequent rows. We're going to do lilac for our next row. So again, you can start in any one of the chain spaces between clusters. Yarn over, bring that to the front, and chain 3. And we'll do 2 more double crochets into this space. Chain 1. Okay, so I'm just going to explain what we're doing just in case you started in a different spot to me, but hopefully now you'll be able to see a bit of a square shape to your granny square. So these are our sides. These corners here are the ones that have the 2 clusters coming out of the 1 gap. So into our side, so this next hole here is another side, we're just going to do a single cluster of 3 double crochets. And then chain 1. And then when you get to your corner, so your set of 2 clusters, we're going to work into the space in between those 2 clusters. And because it's our corner, we'll do another 2 clusters joined by a chain stitch. So we'll do our first cluster. Chain 1. And then do a second cluster back into the corner space. Now these next two gaps are our sides, so we're just going to do single clusters into there. So do a chain one, a cluster, chain one, and another cluster into this next gap. And then chain one, and now we're at our next corner. So again, we're going to work into the gap between the two clusters, and we'll do another two clusters separated by a chain stitch. Now the next two gaps are our sides, so we'll do chain, cluster, chain, cluster, now we're at our third corner, so chain one, and then do two clusters into this corner space. Two more clusters into each of these side gaps. And then this is our final corner. So I'm going to do two clusters into that corner. Then we'll finish off in the same way. So we're going to do one chain and then connect back into the top of the chain three and do a slip stitch and fasten off. Now for our next row, we're going to use this dark blue. And so hopefully you've kind of got a hang of the pattern now. So basically insert your crochet hook into any one of these gaps, probably starting in a side one. Drape your yarn over, pull it to the front, chain three, and then two more double crochets into that first gap to create your first cluster. Then chain one. This is a side gap, so we'll do a single cluster into this gap. Chain one. Into the corner space, we'll do two clusters separated with a chain one. So hopefully now you've got the hang of the pattern and you can continue this all the way around. So into each of these side spaces, so you'll have 3 side spaces per side, you'll be doing a single cluster of 3 double crochets separated by a chain stitch. Into each of the 4 corner spaces and between your corner clusters, you'll do a cluster, a chain space and a cluster all into the corner space. And you'll just continue that pattern all the way around, and I'll meet you back here at the end of row 5. And then once you're at the end, again we do a final chain and slip stitch back to the start and fasten off. Okay, so row 6 will be our final row. So you want to do row 6 in the white. You can mix up any other colours, but you always want your final row to be in the white. But we'll do row 6 in just the same way. So pull your yarn through to the front, chain 3, 2 more double crochets into that first space, and then just continue the same pattern around for row 6. So this time you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 side gaps. You'll do an individual cluster separated by a chain 1 across the 4 side gaps, and then into each of your 4 corners you'll do 2 clusters of 3 double crochets separated by a chain stitch. So the quality of yarn that comes in these Kmart kits is pretty poor quality, which is probably not surprising for how cheap these kits are, but this white yarn seems to be particularly poor quality. It's very scratchy and squeaky and splitty. The other colours don't seem to be quite so bad, so I feel like they might have used a different yarn for the white. Which is kind of a shame because this is the yarn that we'll be using for our straps. So the bit that will actually hold. Okay, once you've finished row 6, now our first square is complete. The final step that we need to take, however, is just to weave in our yarn ends. So you'll have all these loose pieces of yarn, but it's really important that we weave these in to secure them so that they don't come undone. So the kit includes a plastic tapestry needle. This needle is huge and I think will be quite hard to work through your stitches. So I'm going to use my own metal tapestry needle. And what you want to do is turn your work over so that you are working on the side where all the tails are poking out from, which is the back side or the wrong side of your work. And then you want to take each tail and just thread it onto your tapestry needle. And now we're just going to weave in and through our stitches to secure that tail in place. So you just want to work under different parts of the stitch. There's no kind of exact right way to do it, but you do want to work under at least 3 or 4 different stitches. And ideally you also want to work in a few different directions. It's a little bit hard for this first red section because there isn't much of the red for us to work into. So once you've worked under a few different stitches, then you can just trim this tail that you've woven in close to the work, and then that will keep it secure. So you just want to repeat this process for each of these yarn ends. Okay, so once you've woven in your ends, your first little granny square is complete. So you just want to repeat this process 14 times in total. You can mix up what colors you use. You just want to make sure that row 6, your final row of your square, is always in the white, because we're going to use that as our border color. But otherwise you can kind of mix and match the colors inside the granny square however you like. So I'll meet you back here once you've made all 14 squares to show you how to seam them together and make the straps for your tote bag. Okay, once you've finished all 14 of your squares and you've woven in all of the ends, now we can seam them together to make our tote bag. There is an optional step which you can do before we start seaming, and that is to block your squares. Now, blocking is kind of like magic. It's a really handy thing to know how to do to improve the final look of your crochet pieces. And essentially what blocking is it's stretching your work to even out your stitches, create a flatter surface. It's great for kind of improving drape or kind of flowiness of your work, which can be really useful for things like jumpers or other clothes. But also it can help for a project like this by making your squares a little bit more consistently sized. So you might have found that some of your squares have ended up slightly different size than some of the others. I actually accidentally picked up the wrong size crochet hook for a couple of my squares, so I've got a few that are very noticeably larger than my other squares. So I'm going to use blocking to help kind of even this out a little bit and have my squares be slightly more consistent in size. You can't block things to make them smaller, but you can block them to make them a little bit larger. So it's a good way to kind of increase the size of some of your smaller squares so that they match the size of your larger squares. So I'm going to include some links to some tutorials in the description below for blocking, because that could be an entire video by itself, but I'll give you a brief overview in case you want to try it out yourself for this project. So I'm going to use a granny square blocking board. This is a really handy thing to have if you do make a lot of granny squares, because it makes the blocking process a lot quicker and easier. Now, I've included a link to the blocking board that I use in the description below if you wanted to get yourself one, but certainly it's not necessary, and I'll explain how you can do some blocking without a blocking board in a moment. But essentially how I use this blocking board is I put these pins into the corners of one of my larger squares. So again, blocking is great for stretching pieces. It won't shrink them. So you want to use the dimensions of your larger square. And then essentially I can just thread my other squares on here to stretch them out to the right size. Now I'm going to use steam blocking, so I'm going to put them on here dry and then I'm going to steam them. And now I'm just going to use steam to block these. So this is actually just a cheap facial steamer that I got from Kmart, but you can use a garment steamer or even the steam function on your iron. If you're using the steam function on your iron, be careful not to actually iron the granny squares. This is acrylic, so it will melt if it gets too hot. You just want to use the steam shot function. And essentially I'm just going to steam the squares, making sure it gets inside. Of course, make sure you're being careful with any steam. This facial steamer is pretty low power, so it doesn't come out too hot. And then I'm just going to allow this to dry and cool down completely. So that's probably the easiest way to block. What you can do if you don't have a blocking board like this is actually just to use cardboard or foam pads or even the top of your ironing board, just something that you can stick pins into without damaging it. And then you essentially want to pin your granny squares into the right shape. If you're doing it on a cardboard, then you don't want to stack them like this. You actually want to do a grid pattern and pin them all into place and then just steam them in the same way that I have here. Another option is to wet block, which is where you actually get your granny squares completely wet, wring them out slightly, and then again pin them into the shape that you want them to sit in and allow them to dry completely. Noting that this will take you probably at least 24 hours for the granny squares to completely dry. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is actually arrange your granny squares in the pattern that you're going to sew them together. So they've included this little diagram here in the pattern to show you how to do that. So your first two squares will be the side, these 4 in pink will be the front with 2 along the base, The next two will be the side, and then the final four will be the back. So set out your granny squares in this pattern. Play around with different color combinations and maybe put some of your favorite squares on the front and the back, and maybe some of those squares you're not quite so happy with on the base. And then essentially we'll be seaming across every touching side in this diagram. So you can seam each of these pairs together, and then we can start to seam them along the long side, and then finally add the base at the bottom. So take your first two squares that will represent one of your sides. Okay, so firstly I'll show you how to do a slip stitch seam in case you want to use that approach, and then I'll switch over to the mattress stitch. So for the slip stitch seam, you want your crochet hook, you want to place your two granny squares with the right sides facing out, and then just line them up. Then you want to insert your crochet hook into the first stitch on your first granny square, and then into the corresponding stitch on the granny square at the back. Drape your yarn over and pull it through to the front, and then you just want to yarn over and pull that yarn through. Now we're going to do slip stitches all the way along the side here, and the way you do that is insert your crochet hook under the next stitch on your first square, and then we're going to go through the corresponding stitch on the second granny square. So essentially each time you're working through two stitches, one for each of the two granny squares. Then you're going to yarn over and pull that yarn all the way to the front. You'll have two loops on your hook. Then we're going to pull this loop through the one that's already on our hook. And that's a slip stitch. You're just going to do this all the way around. Once you get more practice, you can also do that in one movement. So essentially you pull the yarn through and then through the loop on your hook. And you can just work this all the way along. Now the slip stitch seam will give quite a visible seam. You'll kind of get this like ridge in the middle, but it does look quite nice. It's a nice finish, but it will look a little bit different than the mattress stitch seam. So that's option one, and as I said, a great option if you're limited to the plastic tapestry needle. Slip stitch seam is probably also a little bit quicker, I would say, than the mattress stitch. So for the mattress stitch, we're actually going to be using the tapestry needle, so you won't need your crochet hook at all. And what you'll need to do is cut quite a long piece of the white yarn. And again, we want the right sides of our work facing out, so the side that you want on the inside of your bag to be facing each other, and the right sides on the outside. And then we're actually going to work into the middle of our stitches. So you'll see your top row of stitches has your front loop, the loop closest to you, and your back loop. You want to go basically inside the V of the stitch, and then to come out inside the V of the next stitch. You're going to pull this most of the way through, but leave a bit of a tail, and we'll weave this in at the end. Then essentially we want to do the same thing on this side. So you're going in to the V of the first stitch and coming out in the middle of the V of the second stitch, and pulling that all the way through. Just be careful not to pull this yarn tail through. And then we want to go back into where our yarn was coming out of. So our yarn is coming out of this stitch here, so we want to go back into that stitch and out the next one. And then again on the front, we want to go back into the gap where that yarn is coming out of, and through, up through the next stitch. And we're just going to keep working like this all the way across the side of our two squares. Now as you're working, you want to keep it a little bit loose as you're going so you can see what you're doing, but every so often you just want to pull tightly on the yarn, and you'll find it closes up really nicely. Okay, so you want to do that all the way to the end, and you'll know you're at the end when you do the final stitch before the chain space on the corners. And again, just pull on that tail so it closes it up nice and tightly. Then you can trim this off, and you can weave in both of these two ends, and that's your first pair of granny squares joined. So you just want to repeat this now so that you've got another 6 pairs of granny squares. So we're essentially going to join each of these pairs here, so this pair, this pair, this pair, this pair, this pair, this pair, and this pair. So lay them out in this formation and then just join them vertically. And then I'll meet you back here when we join the panels together on the long edge. Okay, once you've got your 7 pairs of squares seamed together, now we're going to seam them together in this pattern here. So you want to lay 6 of your pairs in a row. This first pair will be the side, these 4 will be the front, this will be another side, and then these 2 will be the back. And then this little piece down here will be the base. So what you want to do is now seam these 2 pairs together. So seam along here, then add one here, add here, add here, and add here. And then once you've got that big strip done, you can add this one here to the second and third row of your larger strip. And then I'll show you how to seam it together into the bag shape. Okay, so once you've seamed all your squares together, you should have something that looks kind of like this. So then to join your bag together, you just want to turn it to the wrong side. This piece here is your base, so you firstly just want to create this corner here, so have your right sides facing out and seam along this edge here, and then do the same on this side here. And then once you have seamed those 2 corners, you can seam the 2 final sides together, and you'll essentially have a bucket shape that has one opening at the top and these 2 squares as the base. Okay, so once you've seamed up your bag, it should look like this. You'll have 2 granny squares on the base, 2 squares on each side, and then 4 granny squares on the front and the back. And your top will be open. Just make sure you weave in all of your seam ends. And now we're going to do the top part of the bag and the straps. So you want the white yarn to do the top of your bag. And we're actually going to do a couple of rows continuing the granny stripe pattern that we did for our squares. So to start the top of the bag, you just want to insert your hook into any one of the chain spaces on the top row of your bag. Drape the yarn over and pull it to the front, and then we'll start by chaining 3. And then we're just going to do clusters of 3 double crochets into each chain space. So this first chain 3 is going to act as our first double crochet. So we just want to do 2 more into that same space. And then we'll do a chain 1, and then another cluster of 3 double crochets into the next chain space. I'll just do this all the way around, doing a chain 1 space in between each cluster. Now when you get to the edge of 2 granny squares, you're going to do 1 cluster into the corner space of the first square. Then you'll do a chain 1 and then do your cluster into the corner space of the next square. And then just continue this all the way around the top of your bag, and I'll meet you back here when you get back to the start. Okay, so once you've gone all the way around the top and you're back at the start, we're just going to do a slip stitch to join back to the start of our row. So after you've done your last cluster, do your final chain 1. And then to do a slip stitch, you just want to insert your hook under the V of the top of the stitch of the very first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then pull that loop through the loop on your hook. And that's a chain stitch. Then we're going to chain 3 to create the height for row 2. And then we're going to do another row of granny stitches, so another row of doing 3 double crochet clusters into each chain space. So you just want to work again into every chain space from the previous row by doing 3 double crochets. Separated by a chain 1. And again, just do this all the way around until you get back to the start. Okay, so once you get back around to the start, in the gap that is just before the initial chain 3 that you did, you just want to do 2 double crochets into this space. And then we'll do a slip stitch to the top of that chain 3 just to join the row, and that will act as your 3rd double crochet for that final cluster. Now for round 3, we are going to switch to actually working onto the top of the stitches rather than into the chain spaces. So essentially we want to start row 3 with a chain 3. We're going to do 1 double crochet into the chain space, and then we're going to do 1 double crochet into each of the 3 clusters. So you want to insert your yarn over, insert your hook under both prongs of the V of the top of the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. You want to do this for every double crochet in the cluster. And then when you get to the chain space, you'll just do 1 double crochet into that chain space, and then another 3 double crochets into the 3 double crochets of the cluster. So you just want to continue this all the way around, doing a double crochet into each double crochet and 1 into the chain space, and then I'll meet you back here once you get back around to the start of this row. Okay, once you get back to the start, we'll just do another slip stitch to join it back to the top of that chain 3. Now for the next row, we're just going to chain 1, and that's because we're actually going to do single crochets for this next row. So for the next row, we're going to work into the top of each of our stitches, but we're going to do a single crochet. So to do a single crochet, you want to insert your hook under both prongs of the V of the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. You'll have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through both loops. And we'll just do that into every stitch all the way around. Okay, and then once you get right back to the start, you can just do a slip stitch back to that first single crochet to close off the row. Then you want to cut a yarn tail and fasten off by yarning over and pulling that yarn tail all the way through. You can just weave in this final end, and that's the main part of the tote bag done. Okay, so next we want to make the straps, and we're going to do that by making a Romanian yarn cord. So just for illustrative purposes, I'm actually going to use this cord yarn to show you how to make the straps, just because the white yarn is a little bit hard to see on camera. It doesn't have great stitch definition, and this is a little bit tricky, and it's important to see where you're inserting your hook. So I'll use this yarn just to show you how to do it, but you want to be using the white yarn, same yarn as you've been using for the top of your bag. And we want to start by doing a slip knot. So to do a slip knot, you want the ball of yarn to the left of you, the yarn tail to the right of you, pick up your yarn tail and create a loop like so. Then put your finger on the X of the loop and drag the loop over the yarn tail. Next, we're going to grab this little strip of yarn in the middle of the loop and pull that through. And that's a slip knot. Don't pull this too tightly, We want this to be a little bit loose, and in general you want to be stitching this cord fairly loose. If you do it too tightly, it's going to be really hard to work into. Then we're going to start by chaining 2, so you just want to yarn over and pull that yarn through the loop on your hook. So you'll have 2 chains on your hook. Now we're going to work into the first chain that we did, so we'll ignore this first chain that we've just done, and we're going to work back into the very first chain that we made. And you're just inserting your hook into the middle of the chain, so under this top loop into the middle of the V. So you'll have 2 loops on your hook, and then you're going to do a single crochet. So just yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Then what we're going to do is turn your work to the side. So this is the front here. You want to turn it to the side. You'll see the V of the stitch that you've just done. And then just below that, you'll see a loop that's sticking out like so. You want to insert your hook under that loop. And then just below that, you'll see another loop. So you just want to insert your hook under that loop as well. Then we do another single crochet. So yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now this is going to look like a bit of a knotty mess initially, but it will kind of start to come together as you get a few more stitches into it. So then again we want to turn our work to the side, and now you'll see a V or 2 loops that are kind of poking out on the side here, and this is where we want to insert our hook. So again, there's a V just below our hook, which is the stitch we just made, and then just below that is 2 vertical bars of yarn. So you want to insert your hook under both of these 2 loops and do a single crochet. And then we just keep repeating this. So again, turn it so it's on the side. You'll see the 2 loops that are poking out on the side there. Insert your hook under both of those 2 loops and do a single crochet. Again, turn, insert under those 2 loops and single crochet. And then you'll start to get something that looks like this. So it's got kind of horizontal bars and then there's loops that go along the side. So you just want to keep doing this process until your strap measures 60 centimeters. Once you get to the end of 60 centimeters, you can just cut off a yarn tail, yarn over and pull that yarn all the way through to fasten off. You want to leave a fairly long yarn tail if you can, because we will use that to attach the straps to the bag. And then you want to repeat this process a second time to make the second strap. Okay, so our very last step now to finish off our bag is to attach our 2 straps. Now they have positioned the straps in the images just on the edge of the front of the bag, so basically at the end of the 4 squares that make up the front of the bag, and they suggest just sewing it on. I would typically crochet my straps straight onto the bag. So I'm a little bit concerned that this isn't going to be very strong. So I think it's probably a good idea to try and sew it on as tightly and with as many stitches as possible, just to avoid the risk of it coming undone. If you've left a long yarn tail on any of the ends of your handles, then you can use this to sew it on. Otherwise, you can just cut another piece of yarn to sew it on. So you just want to thread it onto your needle. And I suggest probably sewing it onto the row of double crochets, just so that it's not too close to the edge. This part of the bag is a little bit more solid than the granny stitch part. And then once you're happy that that's nice and secure, you can weave in this final yarn tail in just the same way we've woven in all of our other ends. And then once you've attached it on one side, you just want to attach it on the same side of your bag over 2 squares, so over the 2 front panels, and you want to secure it just in between that front panel and side panel. And then you just want to do the same with the strap at the back, so connect it between the back panels and the side panels, and again on the back between the back and the side panel. And then your bag will be complete. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope that you found it useful. And if you made it to this point in the video, I'm so grateful. You are my people, and I am so glad that you found your way here. And if this project has got you hooked on crochet, be sure to like and subscribe for more info and inspo for new crochet makers. Also, if you're really wanting to master the art of crochet, be sure to check out my Learn How to Crochet kit in my YouTube storefront. So this kit is a little bit different from others that you'll find in the market. I've designed this kit more like a Learn How to Crochet masterclass in a box. And by that I mean that I've specifically designed the patterns so that they are ideal for beginners, cover all of the major stitches and techniques that you'll want to master when you're starting out. What this means is that by the end of the kit, you'll be able to tackle basically any beginner, advanced beginner, and even some intermediate crochet projects. So in this kit, you'll learn things like how to keep your edges straight, how to manage your tension, how to seam, and even how to do some color work. Each pattern builds on the skills that you learned in the previous pattern so that your confidence and your skill set will grow as you work through the kit. And by the end of the kit, you'll have some great little items that you can use around your house. The kit is also designed to teach you how to read a crochet pattern because I've included detailed long form written instructions alongside short form notation in the format that crochet patterns are typically written, along with detailed step-by-step tutorials. It also includes troubleshooting support and other handy tips and tricks. I've also designed the projects to expose you to different types of fibers, different styles of crochet, and different hook sizes, so you can start to learn what you really enjoy to crochet with. So make sure you go and check it out and let me know what you think. If you want to say thanks for any tutorial that you found useful, you can buy me a coffee, which is linked down in the description below. Thank you so much for crocheting with me today, and happy crafting!